Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin. Wake me up when September ends. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, we do this video every single year. It's a little hard to believe, to be completely honest, that it's already been a year since our last Wake Me Up When September Ends video. But here we are. And last September, Bitcoin opened at 20K. This September, it is opening at just below 26K. So it is at least $6,000 higher from where it was last September. But I do want to go through some of the seasonality associated with historical Septembers and just discuss likely outcomes. Now, to sort of get the caveat out of the way, while it is true that most Septembers are red, that doesn't necessarily mean that every September has to be red. And at some point, we'll make one of these videos and we will in fact find us in a green September, right? So we always have to admit, hey, it is a general trend and it's likely to be a red month, but there's no guarantees with that, and it's possible it ends up being green. With that said, if you're curious, the last time we had a green September, you would have to go back to 2016. So 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and potentially 2023. We don't know yet, but 6 red Septembers in a row. In fact, if you were to average out all the prior months, going back through the history we have here for Bitcoin, there's only 2 red months, August and September. However, September's average return is negative 6.6% or so. But that's currently taking into account this one. It's around negative 7%. August, the average return is around negative 1.3%. Now, the standard deviations on this obviously are quite large, so I'm not asking you to take it to the bank because I guarantee they're not going to cash it in. But I will say, on average, Bitcoin tends to drop 7% in September, okay, on average. Now, where would a 7% drop put Bitcoin? Well, at the current price of 26K, 7% down, in fact, puts you at 24K, right? 24K, which isn't really that far down. I mean, we were at that price more or less just a couple of months ago. Just a few months ago, we went below $25,000. But a 7% drop would put Bitcoin at approximately $24,000. Now, it might also be worthwhile to point out that in the last pre-halving year of 2019, Bitcoin dropped 14%. So instead of dropping 7%, it dropped 14%. A 14% drop would actually put Bitcoin down at 22K, right? $22,000. Now, I put out a tweet recently, a couple of days ago, saying that I think there's a decent chance that Bitcoin will see 23K in September. Now, is it a guarantee? Of course not, right? It's not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination. It's just to say, you know what? Historically, we've seen red Septembers. Historically. We have a little bit of momentum here to the downside already. We just had 2 red months in a row. And note that this red month that we just got closed below these areas, right? Where you can see that we had some support, potentially or theoretically at around 27K. We broke below that on at least the monthly close. And I said, well, from a structural point of view, it would seem likely that at some point we're going to come back down and at the very least check out what's going on at 23K. You can see that in January we went up to 23K. February we opened and closed at 23K. And then in March we opened at 23K. So it seems from a structural point of view that 23K is a likely outcome. Okay, now I said in the tweet I think it's going to happen in September. It's possible that it doesn't. Like maybe it happens in October. I don't know. But the point is that given the seasonality, given the idea of, say, negative 7% to negative 14%, it kind of seems like, 23K could in fact happen. Now, the average return in all pre-halving years for September is actually a bit different. It's actually negative 17%. So a 17% draw. This is just if you average out all three prior pre-halving years. A 17% drop would put Bitcoin down at 21K, 21.5K. Now, with that said, it's probably worthwhile to point out that in August, Bitcoin dropped 10%. Okay, and we said it'll probably drop, right? If you averaged out all the three prior Augusts in pre-halving years, not including the one in 2023, it would have given you about a negative 21% average. But if you had only averaged out the one in 2019 and 2015, it would have given you about a negative 11 or negative 12% average. So it ended up being closer to the average of the last two pre-halving years than actually taking that third one. And the reason we went through that exercise on Twitter, at least, by the way, make sure you follow me on Twitter if you don't. Was because in August of 2011, you can see it was about a negative 39% drop, negative 40% drop. So we said, well, why don't we remove that one and just look at the last two pre-halving years and see what it gives you. And it gives you more, closer to a negative, close to what we ended up getting. Okay. So if you just average out the last two pre-halving year Septembers, you actually see an average return of about negative 6%. Okay. So negative 6%. Would not be nearly as bad, right? I mean, that would all be all the way up here at around $24,000. So I still think that given the seasonality of Bitcoin around this time of the year, and you can already see that, it hasn't really gotten off to the best start, but given the seasonality of Bitcoin and given the momentum, right, and the fact that we just had a monthly close below, it would at least stand to reason that there's a good chance that Bitcoin's going to go test 23K. Probably, I think, a good chance it'll happen in September. Maybe not, right? Maybe it'll be October, for all I know. I don't know. But that is what I want us to sort of focus on this month, because our expectations have been met so far. And what were those expectations? Well, if you remember, we've said plenty of times, right? I mean, this is plenty of times we have said this, is that we go up for half the year and we go down for half the year. And in 2019, 5 of the first 6 months were green, and then 5 of the last 6 months were red. And in 2011, 5 of the first 6 months were green, and then 5 of the last 6 months were red. In 2015, September was actually green, but in that case, we had already had 5 red months in that year before going into that September, and it was only about a 3% gain, right? But we had already had 5 red months that year before September. This time, we've only had 3 red months before September. In 2019, we had only had 3 red months going into September. And in 2011, we had only had 3 red months going into September. So I would again argue that, from a sort of like this market cycle behavior perspective, you could argue that it's more closely following 2011 and 2019 in terms of monthly returns, green and red, than it is 2015. Also note that 2015, most of the first half of the year was red, and then the second half of the year was green. But in 2011 and 2019, it was the reverse. The first half of the year was mostly green, the second half of the year was mostly red. But in any case, what our general expectation of pre-halving years are that we go up for half the year, we go down for half the year, and by the end of the year, both bulls and bears are sufficiently red. That's the goal of pre-halving years, is to basically get this time-based capitulation where the price doesn't really go anywhere at the end of the day, but no one cares anymore. And that way, by the time you get to the halving and by the time you get back to QE, no one believes it. Everyone thinks the pump will just get sold off, and then it actually goes up. So September, I think, will be a red month. Now, I do want to draw your attention to one thing here, because in both 2011 and 2019, there was 1 month in the back half of the year that was green. Out of the 6 months, there was 1 that was green. In 2019, it was October, but in 2011, it was December. So I would speculate, dubiously in fact, that September, October, November, or December, one of those months will likely be green. One of them. That is what I would guess, is that one of them will likely be green. If I had to take it a step further, I would say it's likely not going to be September. Doesn't mean that it can't be, but it's likely not going to be, just based on historical seasonality in September. I think it's more likely that you get October or December, or maybe even November. Like, one of those are probably green, and then probably the rest of the others are red, right? Is what I would generally guess. So the reason why we say wake me up when September ends is because September just tends to not be a great month for crypto. Bitcoin, you can see it averages negative in September by a long shot, much worse than any other month. You could go compare this to, say, total market cap and see that, it's showing green right now in September, but the month just started. Again, total market cap has only had one green September going all the way back to 2014. And that one was in 2016, right? So the 2015 green September that we saw for Bitcoin, right? In 2015, September was green. Total market cap was actually red just slightly. So even though Bitcoin went up slightly in September of 2015, total market cap actually went down. More so that rotation of capital that we've talked about in the past, right? Sometimes the market cap doesn't go anywhere, but Bitcoin goes up because there's a rotation of capital from higher risk altcoins to lower risk Bitcoin. Okay? So I think we could speculate, dubiously, of course, right? No guarantees, that there's a good chance that September will end up being red, right? And if it is, I still think that two of these three will also be red. Who knows which one will be green? But that's just based off what we've historically seen, and that our general expectation is that 6 of the months are green, 6 of the months are red, and 5 of them have already been green. So theoretically, it would leave open the door for one of those months to, in fact, be green to make it an even 6 and 6. The counterpoint, of course, is in 2015, we had 7 green months and 5 red months. So it's also possible that there are no more green months this year, and instead of getting 6 and 6, we actually get 5 green and 7 red. So that's also a possibility. But I do think, in terms of going up for half the year and going down for half the year, in terms of making the bulls and bears both sufficiently wrecked, you have to have a few more red months, right? Otherwise, the bulls are not sufficiently wrecked. And what we said before was that normally in pre-halving years, Bitcoin goes up long enough to give the bulls a false sense of security, right? To make them feel invincible. And then the market just goes back down. And it kind of feels like you don't accomplish anything in the pre-halving year, right? It just kind of seems like it's a wash and that no one really wins at the end of the year. That's normally more or less what happens. Now, if you want to, nitpick and say, well, technically it was up this percent. Yeah, but in the grand scheme of things, when we're talking about bull runs that are several 1,000% moves, and if we're going to quibble over like a 30% move or a 40%, that is not what we're here for, right? You're not here because you think Bitcoin's going to go up 30% or something. You're here because you think it's going to go up, 1,000% over the long haul. And so that's why you're here in the Cryptoverse, right? Most probably you're not here for the community. If the price didn't go up, most of us wouldn't be here, right? It's just the truth. So might as well face the truth head on than pretend like it's something that we're, they're doing something that we're not. So monthly returns, average in September, are red. There's another interesting way to look at this, and I don't really talk about this that much, but it's called counting monthly returns. I made a video on this. If you search my channel a long time ago, if you just search like counting Bitcoin, I think you'll find a video on this chart. So basically, and bear with me here, basically what we're doing is going all the way back to the beginning, and every time we get a green month, we add 1, and every time we get a red month, we subtract 1, right? So basically, it's either going up or down, right? So you're adding 1 or subtracting 1. What's interesting is that last cycle, the low came in terms of counting, because we know that January of 2019 was in fact red, even though the bottom came in December 2018, but that this low came at a monthly return count of 16. It then double bottomed in March of 2020 at a monthly count of 16. This top over here was at 23. This top over here was at 24. It's interesting, right? And the secondary top was at 23. So these tops were the same, more or less, as these. This low was the same as this low, right? 16 and 16. The low that we got back in November or back in December, was 17 in terms of the monthly count. It goes straight down here at the end just because we haven't completed the month, so it hasn't plotted it fully out through September. But you can see that if September is red, then it would put the monthly count at 18. The monthly count right now is at 19. Right, because we just finished August. So the monthly count right now is 19. But if the month stays red, then it'll give us a monthly count of 18. To get down to a monthly count of 17, though, we would need at least one more red month after September. And if you get September be red and then October is green, then you need 2 more red months to get back, right? So then you could have November and December then be red if October is green and September is red. And then you get down to your monthly count. And by the way, if you look at last cycle, you can see that the monthly count at the end of September, coincidentally, was 18. So exactly 4 years ago, the monthly count was 18. If September closes red, the monthly count will be 18. It's fascinating, right? Like the repetitive behavior of the cryptoverse. But remember, last cycle, when the monthly count was 18 in September, we got a move higher in October, and then November and December were both down. January was up, and then February and March were down. Okay? And then it got this double bottom here at a monthly count of 16. So if we were to get down to a monthly count of 17, it would be interesting, right? Start looking to see if it can hold that level. Perhaps it'll go down to a monthly count of 16, right? Just like that's where we went last cycle. At these highs, remember the monthly count was 23, and at this high, we went one higher. We went to 24. At the low here, we went 16 and 16, and then so far this has been 17. So, plus or minus 1 or so seems to be a reasonable tolerance there. I would keep an eye on this, though, especially as we get into the halving year, because that's where things can off. The volatility often picks back up, right? So if you're bored with tears in the pre-halving year, then this is how all the pre-halving years are, right? I mean, this is not really any different. Volatility normally picks back up in the halving year because it's an election year too. And remember, election years bring a lot more uncertainty. Okay, election years bring more uncertainty. Additionally, we are in a rate hiking cycle from which we've never really seen before, in this aggressive. And at this rate, we likely will start to see the labor market show noticeable effects from all these interest rate hikes by the end of this year, early next year. So if the labor market starts to show signs of weakness, at the same time that inflation is coming down because maybe we're going into a recession, and we also have an election year where the incumbents are going to want to do what they can to try to stay in power, there's likely going to be some political pressure to go back to some looser monetary policy, right? Just so that we're not continuing to hike forever and watch all these companies go bankrupt. Okay, so at some point in the election year, just like we saw in 2020, we'll likely see QE return in some form. Okay, that is my guess. And when it returns, that is normally when you would expect the altcoin market to start doing well again, right? I've said for 20 months now that the altcoin market is too risky, and I'm not trying to take anything away from people who have invested in altcoins, and they've done some of them have done well. Most people have just lost money, I think, but some people have done well. They've picked some of the few altcoins that did well. I'm not trying to take anything away from these people. I've dabbled in the altcoin market, previously in pre-halving years, and I found some good ones that did well. It's just the longer you're in the cryptoverse, the less you care about dealing with all that nonsense, and you more so just care about sort of preserving the portfolio as best you can, especially in bear market years and pre-halving years, and just getting ready for the 2024 the halving year and the post-halving year. Okay, because I know a lot of people think I'm a Bitcoin maxi because I talk about the dominance and I talk about the altcoin reckoning and whatnot. But I only talk about the altcoin reckoning because I've been wrecked by the altcoin reckoning on more than one cycle. And it just seemed a little bit convenient to me to say, well, why don't I just sit this one out, and not deal with it? and then just get in later on once the dominance of Bitcoin is higher, once we've gone through the pre-halving year and the bear market year, and once we're closer, to QE returning. Okay, so that it was just a decision I've made, and so I stand by that decision. I don't regret it for a minute. I have missed out on some pretty cool rallies in the altcoin market, but at the end of the day, a lot of these altcoins are still kind of hugging their lows, right? Like DOT is, I think, actually just put in a new low, didn't it? Yeah, I mean this is a new low, literally, as of yesterday. Well, technically, where I am right now, it's still August 31st. By the time you see this video, it'll probably be September 1st. But literally today, DOT put in a new low for the cycle at 422. Did it go lower over here? Okay, I went to 421 over here in June of 2023. So I guess it's not technically a new low, but it's pretty close, right? It's pretty close. Some of them have put in new lows. I believe AVAX just put in a new low, what, a week ago? It went to 976. Today it went to 981. Algorand, didn't that one just see a new low a couple of weeks ago? 0.0934. Back over here in June, it was 0.0914. So maybe this one was, no, this one was lower. This was, this was 0.0873, 0.0873. This one was 0.0914. So this one actually lower. So you can kind of see a lot of these alts have actually just kind of been stuck in traffic on struggle street, right? They just kind of keep going lower. They keep testing these lows. And the issue is that if you test it long enough, eventually the floor can break out. Like for instance, if you take this one, once it was testing this low enough, eventually it just couldn't handle it anymore and it broke down, right? So I mean, you're kind of looking at like, there's a risk of sort of that stuff kind of happening again. It doesn't mean that it can't get, one more little fake out or something before going back down, but it's just hard to imagine that until you get back to some form of QE, that a lot of these altcoins are probably just going to continue doing what they're doing, right? So it's hard to imagine them doing well in a sustained way as long as the status quo goes unchanged. So, going back to sort of Bitcoin, right now we're at 26K, and this move here, I think got a lot of people. It drew a lot of people off sides. What's interesting is that it actually went to the point that we sort of speculated that it might, right? The 20-week moving average. In fact, this wick is basically identically up to that 20-week moving average. Maybe just it's off by like $10 or something. But the 20-week moving average is at 28,209. This wick went up to 28,167. So it came, within $40 or $50 or so of the 20-week moving average. And this is something that we said, I put out this tweet when I said I think Bitcoin might go to 23K in September. I followed it up by saying in the same thread that it'll likely backtest the 20-week SMA first, okay, before it goes down. So backtest it first. Then we got the pump, and now we're back down to 26K, but there is no guarantee that we break down immediately, okay? If you actually look at September of 2019, we broke down at the end of the month. We then consolidated. We had a wick up, and then we basically didn't go anywhere, and then we actually went up again, and then went down and put in a new low. Okay, so if we're following this pattern, right, of getting two red candles and then sort of a weekly candle where we get a wick up to the bull market support band followed by another move in a couple of weeks, then there is still some reason to believe that it could fake people out once again before pushing lower. But I think for me, I think there is still a good chance that Bitcoin will roll over, at some point here in the next like 4 to 5 weeks. Whether it does it from here, whether it goes straight down and goes to 23K, or whether it bounces back up again and then goes down, I don't really know, and I also don't really care. So if you're trying to look for an answer out of me on that one, I don't really know. I don't. It's hard to know, how the market's going to move in any given hour. And, a lot of the people that were really excited about this move and were sort of dunking on anyone who sort of expressed their concerns with the move, sort of mimicking that of XRP, where are they now, right? I mean, all this entire move was faded. If you look at it on like a daily time frame, I mean, legitimately, the entire move was faded in 2 days. In 2 days, the entire move got faded. So just something, something to think about. Again, like these moves that happen. And look at this. This weekly candle for Bitcoin is red. Think about all the excitement that we've had this week. Bitcoin basically round tripped. It went all the way down to 25,680. It went all the way up to 28,167, and here we are back at 26K. And it's one hell of a candle, that's for sure. But usually in September, we don't really get a whole lot of great movement. Last cycle, the first week of September was green. I do remember that in September, not last year, but in last cycle of the pre-halving year. I remember this being green because I remember going into September and thinking that was likely to be red, and then we got a green month, or a green week. But then by the end of the month, it still rolled over, and the last candle here was a 20% drop or so. Now, arguably, from a structural point of view, we've already had this drop below the 20-week SMA, right? It actually occurred here in August. And we talked about how this is a pretty normal thing, right? That Bitcoin, in every August or September of every pre-halving year, it is dropped below the bull market support band. Every August or September of every pre-halving year. And the reason it does that is because normally there's a correction in the S&P 500 in August or September of the pre-election year, right? Of the pre-election year. And this time was no different, right? We got the correction in the S&P. Now Bitcoin's stuck below the 20-week. And if last cycle the S&P went on to put in new highs in Q4, and Bitcoin still stayed in a downtrend for the rest of the year. So, we have to consider that it could, that the Bitcoin might be in a downtrend even if the S&P goes higher. Okay? And again, I know people are saying, well, what about this recession or something? Again, there likely is a recession at the end of this cycle. It's hard to know exactly when that is, but that it might not happen until next year, for all we know. Okay? Could happen this year, could happen next year. Hard to say. The labor market is showing resilience at this point. The job opening numbers are starting to soften up a little bit, but it's still going to take a few months for initial claims to start printing in the 300Ks, which is what it's likely going to need to do to see really any sustained move on the unemployment numbers. So this is where we are. This is where we are right now. Bitcoin 26K rallied to the 20-week, got rejected, and now we just find ourselves back down here. Good chance September is going to be red. Maybe we'll get lucky number 7 and it'll be green. But my expectations going into September are always that the month is just going to generally suck. Everyone says, nope, this time's going to be different. And then usually it ends up kind of sucking, right? So just be on the lookout. If you do get the first week of the month be green, that's what actually happened in 2019. And then you can kind of see what came after it. Maybe just to look for the hell of it, what happened in 2022. I don't remember. It looks like the first week, the first couple of weeks were green, right? But the month still closed red. So just remember, right? Just because you get a move in the short term, if it's green, it doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, in 2022, it started off green, and then we still closed the month red, right? We got a couple of green candles, and we got some pretty large red candles. In 2021, the first week was green, and then we got a pretty large red candle. In 2020, I remember this one. Basically, so the week of August 31st, so the August 31st started that week, but then that week ended up being 12% of the downside. So in this case, it just went straight down into that 20-week moving average. Today, we don't have the luxury of being above the 20-week moving average in September, right? So the benefit of both 2020 and 2021 is that we were actually above the 20-week moving average, and the 20-week was able to help us hold as support in both 2020 and 2021. But in 2022, we were actually below the 20-week moving average, and it generally just held as resistance. And I would argue, again, it's probably going to hold as resistance. September is not normally the month that Bitcoin rallies back above the 20-week SMA, okay? It can bounce off the 20-week SMA in September if it's above it, but it's not normally the month that it gets back above it if it's below it, if that makes sense. And even if it is above it, like in 2019, we still fell below it. And in 2018, we were below the 20-week SMA in September, right? You can see right here. And we ended up holding it as resistance. And in that case, it was more or less that first week of September that we went down. So, I mean, I would encourage you to sort of look at these average returns and just say, you know what? anything's possible. We're not going to, we're not going to be deterministic about it, but, on average, it does not tend to be the best month for Bitcoin, and by association, of course, the entire cryptocurrency asset class. And so we'll see if this comes to pass. We'll see if our thesis about half up for the year and half down for the year comes to pass. I think it will. It almost seems like I do wonder. I've sort of wondered if we're gonna make a little Christmas tree just in time for Christmas, where you kind of see it playing out. I don't know exactly. I mean, you gotta even see that wick right there, right? But if it does something like that's right, but just in time for the holidays. But we will see. We'll see what ultimately transpires in the coming weeks, in the coming months for Bitcoin. Hopefully, you guys at least understand my thesis. It doesn't mean it's going to be right. I don't want to give you the impression, because I know I do get things wrong quite frequently. But it is at least hopefully backed by data as much as it can be, and we'll try to stick with that as best we can. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Wake me up when September ends. See you guys next time. Bye.